Today I'm going to show you how to paint your Xbox One controller using these very easy steps. First, you're going to need a few supplies. As you'll see on the screen, you need 320 grit sandpaper, plastic primer, your choice of paint in 2 colors, spray bottle of water, clear acrylic paint, T8 security driver, and a stand. To remove the faceplate, there are 5 screws you'll have to remove. You have to remove the handles first and take the 2 screws under each handle out. To make sure the primer sticks to the surface of your faceplate, take your 320 grit sandpaper and sand the entire surface of your faceplate to make sure that it's totally dull. You should have no shiny areas on the surface at all. Make sure you get around where the large holes are, where your D-pad and where your analog sticks come out. That takes a little more time to get that area sanded, but you want to make sure everything has a dull finish to it. Once you've completed sanding, make sure you clean the entire area with some rubbing alcohol or some soapy water, and then let it air dry. Once your faceplate is sanded and you've cleaned it off, you can begin priming. Make sure that you shake the primer very well before you start spraying. Spray in very short, even strokes. The stand that I have my faceplate on, I just made out of an old wire coat hanger and bent it so that it holds the faceplate steady while I'm spraying it. For the primer, you're only going to have to apply 1 coat. As you can see, I've been rotating the faceplate to make sure that I've gotten all of the areas evenly covered with the primer. Once you've finished applying the primer, let it sit for at least an hour so that it completely dries. If you don't let it dry completely, the paint won't stick correctly. In an earlier project that I did, the paint actually cracked. So let this sit, don't be in a hurry. Once your primer's dried, you can move on to painting. You can apply your first of 2 coats of paint. Again, just like the primer, use short, even strokes. Don't overspray. Rotate your faceplate so that you can get different angles to make sure everything's evenly coated. For this project, after I did the first coat of paint, I let it sit for 1 hour before applying the second coat. After the second coat, depending on your humidity, let the paint sit for at least 2 to 3 hours to dry before moving on to applying the raindrop effect that I'm going to show you next. Now that your second coat of paint is dry, you can begin working on the raindrop effect. Take your spray bottle that has ordinary tap water in it and just spray water on your faceplate until you get a nice design of different size water drops resting on top of the faceplate. Spraying water on the paint will not ruin your project. The water will bead up on top and it will not affect the paint whatsoever. Now that you have your water drops the way you want them on the faceplate, grab your second color of spray paint. The way my fingers are pointing on the screen right now, that's the direction you want the spray to come from your can for your second color. You want it to go straight across the top. Hold the can back far enough so that the paint doesn't disturb the water drops and that the paint just kind of falls onto the water. It would be a really good idea for you to do a practice run on just a piece of cardboard or wood before you do this on your controller, so that you can get the paint to lay on the water drops the way that you want them to. It's very easy to overdo it on this step of the project. You only need to do a couple short blasts of the paint going straight across the controller and dropping onto the water. Once you've finished applying this paint on top of the water droplets, this is where all the time of waiting comes into play. You want this water to completely evaporate off of the faceplate, and you want the black paint or whatever color paint you're using for this effect to completely dry. Now that the water is evaporated and the paint is dried, you can move on to clear coating. Now let's get a closer look at this faceplate that I did. It's a really amazing effect once everything dries. Just like when you applied the primer and the paint, make sure you shake the can very well before you apply this clear coat. And as you can see here, do it in short, even strokes. Rotate the faceplate to make sure you're getting every area of the faceplate. You're going to want to apply 2 coats of clear coat. The first coat, let it dry for about 2 hours, and then apply the second coat, and then let it dry for 12 to 18 hours before you touch this faceplate again. After 18 hours, and I knew this was all dry, I went ahead and removed the faceplate from the stand. Now, with all these layers of paint and clear coat, some of this stuff's going to collect inside the holes where the buttons come up through from your controller. So you may need to take a blade or use some sandpaper and clean those areas from inside the holes, so that when you put the faceplate back on, none of the buttons stick. Once you scrape the paint out of the button holes, put the faceplate on and make sure none of the buttons are sticking. Once everything looks good, you can put the faceplate back on and put the screws in.